Welcome to the Standing Committee on Official Languages, to our 85th meeting. We are Thursday, the 13th of June, and pursuant to standing order before us, we're here to study the Department of Citizenship and Immigration obligations under the Official Languages Act. Appearing before us today, we have the Minister, Honorable Jason Kenney, Minister of Citizenship, Immigration, and Multiculturalism.
Mr. Sylvester and Madame Prince Saint-Amand from the Department, and we welcome all of you. And Minister Kenney, you have the floor for an opening statement.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président et collègues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, I'm very pleased to be here with you today, along with the officials from the department. Give me the opportunity to discuss with you today our roadmap. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me today, and as I've said, accompanying me today, Peter Sylvester, Associate Deputy Minister of Citizenship and Immigration. Peter is also our CIC's official languages champion, and also accompanied by Corinne Prince Saint-Amand, Director General Integration and FCRO. In 2006, the government, in collaboration with representatives of Francophone minority communities, established a target to increase the percentage of French-speaking immigrants to those communities to 4.4% of the total number of immigrants settling in Canada outside of Quebec by 2023. As part of our 2008-2013 roadmap objectives, Our goal was to reach an interim target of 1.8% of the total number of permanent residents, once again settling outside Quebec by 2013. And we managed to achieve this target 2 years ahead of schedule. Since 2005, the number of French-speaking permanent residents in Canada has increased by almost 40%. This is a major achievement. The significant progress we've made to date has allowed us to revise our recruitment target to 4% of the total number of economic immigrants settling outside of Quebec, and this to be reached by 2018. And we are fully confident that we will meet our original target of 4.4% by 2013 ahead of schedule. To achieve this target as a result of increased collaborative effort among all our federal partners and other levels of government and stakeholders.
Well aware, the government is in the process of implementing transformational changes to ensure that the immigration system works in Canada's best interests, attracting immigrants with the skills that we need who can integrate into our labor market quickly, working at their skill level shortly after their arrival in Canada. We believe these improvements will have a very positive effect on Canada's official language minority communities. Time doesn't permit me to go through all of the important changes we're making, but I'd like to focus on one key change in particular. That is the movement towards what I call the meta reform, following the example of Australia and New Zealand with the adoption of an expression of interest system, which will subsume most of our economic immigration streams. It will allow for Canadian employers, provinces, and territories, and perhaps community groups, to select skilled immigrants from a pool of pre-qualified applicants who we are confident have the human capital to integrate successfully. Under the current federal skilled worker program, also known as the points system, applicants apply based on the objective points grid, which we've just made some significant changes to, by the way. And once they receive permanent residence, what used to be called landed immigrant status, they can choose to settle, obviously, wherever they like in Canada. That's labor mobility, the mobility rights. And efforts are usually made by governments and stakeholders reactively after they arrive to try to get them to settle in an official language community. Well, with the new expression of interest system, which we plan to have in place by the end of next year, employers and provinces will be able to more effectively recruit immigrants to official language communities across the country by directly choosing applicants with the language skills and human capital they need from the pool. In addition, our government has increased the number of immigrants chosen by the provinces through the provincial nominee program by 500%, from about 8,000 a year to around 40,000 this year. Now, this is important, Chairman. In the past, my predecessors from different parties expressed great frustration at the hugely disproportionate number of immigrants who settled, often in ethnic enclaves in the three big metropolitan areas, rather than settling in regions of Canada, including rural Canada, where there are often better employment opportunities. I'm pleased to tell you that as a result of our shift in weight from the skilled worker program to the provincial selection through these provincial nominee programs, we've seen a dramatic improvement in the geographic distribution of immigrants across Canada, a tripling of immigrants to the prairies, doubling to Atlantic Canada, more newcomers going to the interior of BC rather than the greater Vancouver region, the number of immigrants settling per annum in Toronto down by over 25%. So I think that's all positive. And this is kind of presages where we hope to go with the expression of interest system, which we also hope will include or subsume, I shouldn't say subsume, but will partner with provinces so they can select out of that pool. This is very important because when you're trying to get a Francophone immigrant to go to Saint-Boniface or Saint-Léonard, frankly, if they're just coming in through the old points grid, chances are they won't go to such places. But if local community groups or employers in those smaller minority language communities can recruit them out of the pool, they're much more likely to settle, obviously, in such places that need demographic reinforcement. Monsieur le Président, je souhaiterais également parler d'une autre façon dont nous avons réussi à...
Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to discuss another successful way that we've managed to attract more French-speaking newcomers, which we've entitled the Destination Canada Job Fair. We've been operating this event now for almost 10 years, and it has become especially popular in the last 5. In fact, last year, there was a record high attendance for the fair in both Paris and Brussels. More than 1,000 jobs were offered by over 80 Canadian employers. Of the 20,000 interested candidates, nearly 5,000 had skilled employers sought and were selected to participate. We're expecting similar success at this year's fair, which will be held in Paris, Brussels, and we've added Tunis in November. Thanks to the job fair, employers may recruit and hire candidates who are eligible to immigrate to Canada on a permanent basis. They may also hire temporary foreign workers in Francophone minority communities if they satisfy the criteria established to assist official language minority communities, or if they're unable to find French-speaking Canadians to fill positions, all the while, of course, ensuring the integrity of our immigration system. The underlying principle, of course, is that Canadians first for any available jobs before foreigners.
As we bring in more official language minority immigrants into Canada, it's equally important that we make sure, once they get here, that they integrate into their new communities and that they succeed. To that end, my ministry continues to focus on providing a variety of settlement services, including free language training, job search training, orientation services, mentorship programs, internship programs, and the like. In fact, since 2006, our government has tripled settlement funding from about $200 million a year outside of Quebec to $600 million this year. Quebec gets funding is based on its own separate formula. Au cours des dernières années, nous avons grandement augmenté le nombre de services.
In recent years, we've significantly increased numbers of settlement services in Francophone minority communities. Between 2009 and 12, we've increased the number of points of service for French-speaking newcomers across Canada, and this by almost 70%. Initially just over 100 to about 170 points of service. Now these are now located in 24 cities across Canada outside Quebec. And just recently we've released Welcome to Canada, a guide to help newcomers to settle in Canada. The French version of this guide can act as a map or a road guide to help French-speaking immigrants settle in their new country, and can also act as a resource for the communities who will be welcoming the French-speaking newcomers. We remain focused on ensuring that we're serving the needs of newcomers and simultaneously the communities that welcome them. That's why between 2008 and 2011, CIC funded more than 50 research projects focusing on access to support services for official language minority communities. This research has contributed to a better understanding of the needs of French-speaking newcomers and the challenges that they face in integrating their new communities. I would like to pause for a moment here, open an aside, to point out that the federal government has a separate immigration arrangement with Quebec under the Canada-Quebec Accord, as you know full well. Quebec selects its immigrants for that province and determines how the settlement funding is to be distributed. I say in principle, in theory, because the investors category, 90% will settle outside of Quebec. Particularly, they go into British Columbia, and I think that's worth a look at, because Quebec has its immigration program. They're looking to find permanent residents, and right away, as soon as they get here, they move to BC. So we're working in close cooperation with the government of Quebec on immigration, as well on the entire portfolio of the issue of official languages minorities.
Retention issues and the needs of English-speaking immigrants in Quebec. This research could improve the reception and integration of immigrants in official language minority communities across Canada. Basically, Mr. Chairman, I know your committee is always looking out for the interests of official language minorities, including of both languages in all parts of the country. But when it comes to immigration, it gets a little tricky, because we don't, most of the power on immigration selection and settlement is devolved to the government of Quebec. So how, the question of attracting Anglophone immigrants to Quebec or supporting them directly through settlement services is much more complex than it is in the rest of the country, where we make the selection choices and fund the services directly. I'll start wrapping up, Mr. Chairman. The government recently unveiled a new roadmap, as you know, for official languages. The roadmap identifies 3 pillars, which you're very familiar with. As the Prime Minister has said, in the context of immigration, our official languages are a crucial anchor point between newcomers and established Canadians. En vertu de la feuille de route pour les langues officielles du Canada, le gouvernement investir.
Under the roadmap for official languages, the government will be investing $149.5 million in official languages initiatives related to immigration over the next 5 years. Extensive research has consistently shown that official languages ability is one of the most effective pathways to integration into Canadian society. And I say economic integration, but of course social and cultural integration as well. And for this reason, the Canadian government is determined to ensure the benefits of Canadian official languages and investing in language training for newcomers.
An overview of some of our most recent initiatives in immigration, how they relate to the Official Languages Act, and the significant progress we've made in increasing the number of immigrants in official language communities. But I admit there is more work to do, and we remain committed to further progress and look forward to your questions and suggestions in this respect. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Ministre Kenney. Maintenant,
Thank you very much, Mr. Kenney. Now we have an hour, 40 minutes at our disposal to ask questions or receive questions from members of the community, and we'll start with Mr. Godin. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks very much to the Minister, Mr. Kenney, for appearing before us today. I think this is a very important issue, and we have a lot of questions, I believe, and knowing our colleague, Mr. Kenney, we'll get straight answers. But before doing so, Mr. Chairman, I must remind you that there was a number of motions that had been presented to committee about the closing of the Maritime SAR Centre in Quebec. Then another motion inviting the chair of the Public Service Commission, Ms. Asimov. We have another invitation here before the 14th of June as well, and the Minister responsible for Industry Canada in dealing with official languages in private sector and how this fits into the Official Languages Act. I think we're going to do that on next Tuesday. But these are a number of motions here, and we're going to have to deal with them fully. There was another motion, I believe, for Privy Council representation and their positions on official languages. A 2-hour session, I believe, with PCO. I think that'll have to wait till the fall because the government agrees with it in principle, but we can't fit it in right now, so it'll be for the fall. Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Minister, there's an item here that perturbs me somewhat. We deal with immigrants that are coming to Canada here, but we're talking about temporary arrivals, temporary immigrants, as it were. And you said earlier in your opening remarks that Canadians come first for available jobs. Oh. No, I'm sorry. No. I mean, you feel free to join in. Microphone for the minister, please. They don't come here for settlement for the most part, these particular class of individuals. They come here for the economic opportunity. So if we want to... I don't think that you've appreciated what the point I'm trying to get at. If a company such as a company in Fort McMurray, which went through human resources list, they're looking 5 years of experience, 5 years of experience to become a roughneck, and it takes 11 weeks of training. 5 years experience, but they have to speak English. I could give you a copy of the job description and stuff, and you told me that this was a responsibility of human resources. So they have to speak English, one of the basic criteria. And then if we look at the other criteria, the other language spoken has to be either Polish, Portuguese, Punjabi, or Spanish, and not French. And then they go a little bit further and say that the incumbents of these positions need not even speak English because there's going to be isolated encampment near Fort McMurray, some distance away. Their room and board will be furnished, and then they'll work for a number of weeks and then 7 days off. So, I mean, you said human resources, and when I met with the minister, Ms. Finley, on this doesn't make any sense. I mean, are you the minister that's responsible for to have immigrants come to Canada, and then French-speaking Canadians can't go and work in Alberta? We have to import some for temporary jobs.
To answer the question, I need to know the date of the application. Was that last year, or was it in the past? Yes, it was last year. It's been a year now. Well, it was legal at that time, but I'm very pleased to emphasize the fact that last month we announced that we would prevent the obligation of speaking non-official languages on the labor market opinions. How could it be illegal when we have people from my regions who are scaffolders, who are trained as scaffolders, and they only speak French, they didn't speak English? How can it be legal when we've got skilled people here in Canada and we bring in foreigners to come and take Canadians' jobs? Thank you, Mr. Godin.
Terms here. But basically, Mr. Godin, just take yes for an answer. We changed the rules. We've made that illegal to do as of last month. So I know you'll be very happy with that.
Monsieur Godin? Yeah. Monsieur Godin?
Oui.
Vous avez la parole.
Oh, je pensais...
Mr. Godin, please go ahead. Oh, I thought you cut me off because I was finished. No, we've changed the rules. We cannot impose a language requirement on such an application except for both Canada's two official languages as of last month. Thank you. The other question, $120 million on the new roadmap, or was it $149.5 million, in order to pay for language training for immigrants. And that was allocated by your department for integrating new immigrants. The roadmap money, is that new funding, or is that money from your own department that was transferred to the roadmap? It was not transferred. The funds were not transferred, but several departments are making investments within the roadmap framework. It is not new funding. Do you have the information, further information? Yes, I have a few things to add. The 149.5 million, 22.5 million is new funding. How much? 22.5. And 7 million were recurring funds, and then 120 million of existing funding for language training. So the Heritage Minister was saying that the roadmap was new funding. It's not really new funding, is it? Some of it is. There's a certain percentage of the funding that is new, yes. Overall, for the roadmap, it was a total of $1.1 billion across the government, the entire government, over 13 departments, of which $266 million was new funding over a 5-year period. Could you, Mr. Minister, could you please ask your officials to provide us with tables with investments per province for the former roadmap and now the new roadmap that has just been launched? Could you please give us that information per province? We have all this information here, in fact, in my notes, and we would be pleased to provide the committee with that information. Fine, thank you. Mr. Gordon. Thank you, Chair. And thank you. I'd like to thank the Minister for being with us today, despite your extremely busy schedule. In your opening remarks, you talked about the new system for the new declaration of interest. Could you please tell us a bit more about the statement of interest, the new system for statement of interest? Sorry, Mr. Gould, what did you say? In your opening remarks, you talked about the statement of interest system. Could you tell us a bit more about that, please, and to explain to Canadians what is involved in that? Certainly. For people who are unaware of the way our past immigration system was structured, it's very difficult to explain because, frankly, this was a dysfunctional system. It had broken down. We're at the point where we had backlogs of over 1 million applicants who had been waiting more than 8 years, and they were all stuck in our immigration programs. Over the last 40 years, we've seen a decrease of economic results for new Canadians. We see an increasing unemployment rate, which has doubled, double among immigrants and among the general population. The unemployment rate for university-educated immigrants is 4 times that of the general population who have a university degree. A decrease of the average income for new immigrants over the last 40 years as compared to the average Canadian. So we had to undertake a fundamental reform because with the points system we attracted too many immigrants according to their human capital who arrived in Canada after having waited for several years only to find themselves unemployed or underemployed. The concept of the new statement of interest system, this new statement of interest system, the whole point is matching immigrants with employers as much as possible. According to our data, when immigrants arrive with a job that's already organized, they earn twice the income that do immigrants who arrive here without having made employment arrangements ahead of time. So the Australian government created a pool.
And they're going to jump in the pool.
So we created a pool of applicants who will make an online application and tell us all about their skills, their level of education, their language skills, their profession. If they are properly qualified, we will invite them to submit a formal application. Over time, we will develop a pool of several hundreds, if not thousands, of pre-qualified, pre-approved, skilled immigrants. And then provinces, communities, employers will all be able to search this pool of candidates for the potential immigrants or for potential candidates amongst the immigrants that they may need, which means that in our provincial nominee program, let's say that we want to search for Francophone immigrants to reinforce the Francophone nature of a certain community. Given that pool of candidates, and thanks to that pool of candidates, they will be able to do so. So we are trying to twin or match immigrants with communities in order to create a more effective system, more efficient, and more productive, economically speaking, for the immigrants. Which provinces will receive the most immigrants, in your opinion, over the next 10 years? With the growth? Well, all the provinces except Ontario. We have seen an increase in immigration over the last several years, mainly because of our increase of the provincial nominee program. As I said, the Three Prairies provinces have seen their number of immigrants triple. And in the four Atlantic provinces, the numbers have doubled. The numbers are stable in British Columbia. In Quebec, there has been a slight increase. They have their own power to choose, so that's not our doing. But Ontario saw a decrease of about 24% in the number of immigrants who decided to move to Ontario. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because Ontario previously would have received about 60% of our immigrants, and now that's gone down to 45%. Which is the appropriate percentage given the percentage of population that lives in Ontario. What about immigrants who say they're Francophone but who are bilingual, or they're more like Anglophone immigrants who do speak French? In France, for example, immigrants will say that they're Francophone, but they almost all speak English as well. Well, that's a good question. Our definition is someone for whom French is the mother tongue or the first official language, first official Canadian language. Do you have something to add? Yes, that's quite correct, Minister. Were you looking for numbers? Well, if possible, because I think Francophone immigrants, when they come from France, for example, they practically all speak English as well. Well, according to the 2011 census, 10.3% of Canadian immigrants who said they were Francophones in Canada. Outside of Quebec, that's 2% of the immigrants were Francophones. And in New Brunswick, by the way, there are 12%. So this is the province with the highest proportion of Francophone immigrants. And are they unilingual Francophones, or do they speak both official languages? Well, it could be a combination, but as the Minister explained, in terms of the definition, these are immigrants whose mother tongue is French, or the immigrants who have another language besides French or English and who choose to say that their first official language here in Canada, in coming to Canada, is French.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Ministre, je suis ici en remplaçant Stéphane Dion.
Yes, I'm here to replace Stéphane Dion. Thank you, Minister. Minister, I have a few questions, and I invite you or your officials to answer. I'd like to give you a little context first. The new roadmap indicates that your department plans to recenter its activities in terms of official languages in order to take into account the modernization of our immigration system. Mr. Dion's comment on that topic, and I quote, "There is always the risk that the roadmap will be a window through which the Conservative government hides its true goals for this program." You can see one manifestation where they're using a part of the plan in order to fund our governmental goals, which are actually different from that of making our communities, our official language communities that live in a minority situation, more vibrant. Do you have a response to his comments? By the way, I'm quite impressed with your French, Mr. Casey. I did not know that you were bilingual. It's a huge challenge. I began as soon as I was elected.
Alors, je dirais que j'ai l'impression.
I would say that it's not about, well, of course there are budget restraints, but one of the aspects of the federal government which wasn't really affected by budget cutbacks, and I would say that the cutbacks are necessary. Overall, there aren't any cutbacks in our case, except for a few small decreases. For example, the Destination Canada program, which is promotion activities in Paris, Brussels, Tunis. We have gotten rid of the travel subsidies for organizations and provinces and municipalities, as well as ONGs, because we said, look, if you want to go to Paris, I don't think the Canadian taxpayers should be paying, federal taxpayers should be on the hook. So we used to contribute $400,000 about. Well, I could just complete those comments by confirming that yes, there might have been some misunderstandings about cutbacks. People were concerned that the Destination Canada program had been cut, had been eliminated. It's still a major program. We've had some wonderful results in 2012 with that program. What was decreased were the funds allocated for travel. Employers who wish to attend the Destination Canada Job Fair certainly can afford to do so, paying for it themselves. Now, we do plan to build upon the success of the Destination Canada program and add to it eventually.
On the concern that this $120 million and the change in emphasis is going to result in teaching official languages to economic immigrants, where the official languages that are being taught are the ones of the majority. And you know, Mr. Minister, that this subject was raised at this committee with by the Commissioner of the Official Languages. He expressed concern that the roadmap had gone through a change of name from being a roadmap for linguistic duality to being a roadmap for official languages, and he shared Mr. Dion's concern that that's exactly what would happen, is that this fund for official language training and not for linguistic duality would end up being spent on something other than the promotion of linguistic duality.
Okay, well, let me say that I'll be absolutely blunt about this. With the exception of, primarily what we're talking about in economic immigration federally is outside of Quebec. So I'm not saying we're abandoning Quebec, but we have an agreement with them. They choose their own immigrants. So we're really talking about primarily Francophone minority communities outside of Quebec. With the exception of the Francophone refugees who we select and direct to live in certain Francophone minority communities, like places like St. Boniface, with that exception, the economic Francophone immigrants who choose to go outside of Quebec are in almost all cases going to have some proficiency, if not fluency, in English. Because, let me just put it to you this way. Good luck. You can be a Francophone working in Winnipeg. That's wonderful. We want you to be there. We want you to support the Francophone community, hopefully working for a Francophone employer. But if you don't speak English, living in Winnipeg, you're going to have a hard time. Let's face it. So there's already, I think we can almost take for granted that the economic immigrants, Francophone economic immigrants going outside of Quebec are already going to have some basic, or if not fluency, in English. So what we really want to do is help the non-French-speaking immigrants outside of Quebec learn French, and they have these 180 points of service. They can go 170 points of service they can go to learn French and get French services. and to provide advice, counseling, and whatnot to the Francophone immigrants outside of Quebec, and we're doing that as well. So, I mean, I think we have to be practical about this. We're not going to turn the 250,000 immigrants we get every year into developing instant fluency in both official languages. I think we have to be a bit realistic about it.
So, can we take it from that there, if we're, as you say it, being realistic, and this isn't necessarily about linguistic duality, is the funding then really aimed at majority language training as opposed to minority language training?
It's demand-based. So we don't aim it at English or French. We aim it at the official language that the immigrants would like to learn. And in most places, in English outside of Quebec, that happens to be English, although we are offering French services. And we're trying to, I'll be honest, there's not a heck of a lot of demand in British Columbia for immigrants to learn French, but they can if they want to. We're offering it for free, and we encourage them to do it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Madame Ambler, or sorry, Madame Monsieur Galipeau.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre, d'être venu. Et
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for attending and being the champion. I was looking at Mr. Sylvester's role in his capacity as a champion for the department, and I was also a witness to the fact that you yourself are a champion for the French language within the heart of government, and for that I thank you. I've noted that often we have a situation where immigrants, so-called Francophone or French-speaking immigrants, are recruited by the province of Quebec, come to Canada through Quebec, but shortly thereafter find themselves in communities outside of Quebec. So these are Francophones that were recruited by the Quebec government, and they end up in Toronto, increasing, of course, the critical mass of Francophones in Toronto. We don't mind. However, on Calgary as well, Fort McMurray as well, perhaps a little less, but the roadmap, which your colleague, Minister Moore, integrated into the 2013 Economic Action Plan, is somewhat similar to its predecessor, a little bit more generous perhaps, to a certain percentage more generous than its predecessor. And much more generous in 2002, 2003. Now, the roadmap for Canadian linguistic duality puts a new emphasis on immigration. How is this taking expression in Quebec with the minority English language communities? Well, as I had said earlier, Mr. Chairman, in the Quebec-Canada Agreement on Immigration, we provide the funding, large, significant funds for settlement programs. Over $250,000 this year is giving transfer to Quebec, and Quebec has 100% control on how that money is spent. And I'm quite sure that not all 100% of that money is spent on settlement programs. But that's just the start of it. But given the agreement and its terms, we cannot offer direct support to Anglophone communities who are in minority situations in Quebec. We're very much aware and quite conscious of our responsibility vis-à-vis the Anglophone communities in Quebec. And this is why we are trying to support financially research programs in Quebec for Anglophones in Quebec. 500,000 for research type projects, but we cannot break and go against the terms of the agreement. We can't offer direct support to the Anglophone minority communities in Quebec, but we can offer them assistance outside the framework of the agreement. Well, we've seen significant evidence throughout Canada over 40 years where federal money transferred to the provinces to assist in promoting linguistic duality is being spent for other purposes in the provinces. Is this the case with the Quebec-Canada agreement? Officially, based on the best available data, the Ministry of Immigration in Quebec spends approximately $110 million on settlement programs in Quebec, but I think what we're offering is $260 million. The Quebec government has never been very transparent as to how this money is expended.
These transfers exist because there is a Canada-Quebec agreement. Does that agreement have a sunset?
No.
Does it get renegotiated
No.
at one point?
No, it does not. And in fact, there is an escalator clause in the agreement for the federal transfers for settlement services in Quebec, which it can never go down but always goes up. And and consequently, I think when the agreement started, they were at about $90 million in circa 1991, and they're now at over $250 million. And there's notionally, the government of Quebec has a responsibility to report on how those funds are spent, but in practice, there's very little information that's furnished.
And we have no muscle in order to enforce that?
I actually intend, Mr. Galipeau, to write the minister of my counterpart in Quebec shortly to raise some concerns that we have around some of these issues.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chisu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Minister, for your great presentation, and I appreciated it very much. Actually, more than your presentation, I appreciate what you are doing for the immigration system in Canada. Why I'm telling you this one, in 1976, in the year that I decided to immigrate in Canada, I didn't have any information, and the consular officer there for immigration told me, you go to Toronto, and I wanted to go to Calgary or Edmonton. But anyway, here I am. So, thank you. The one thing which is very important is the combination between the immigrants and the jobs that you are proposing, and you are promoting this. This is a very important thing, because an immigrant coming to the country is coming from outside Canada. They cannot come to Canada telling, oh, you will find a job. You are doing a service for the immigrant, and also for the Canadians. You are doing an issue which is a win-win situation for both. You are using the skills of the immigrant has and you are combining it for the necessity in Canada, for the skills that they have. So I am asking, you have done this one, but you were mentioning in your presentation that the provincial nominee program increased by 500%. How this is benefiting the immigrants recruited by the provinces, they will stay in the province.
Yeah.
That this means that also they will serve the minority languages,
Yes.
communities, and that is very important, that you are not using the immigration system that after you are going to Toronto or somewhere else.
Right.
And that is happening, and I
Yeah.
tell you from the Romanian community, a lot of people, they used the French, the Quebec immigration system to come after all over the place and come and ending up in Toronto.
The answer is that the retention of immigrants selected who are nominated by provinces in their provincial nominee programs is pretty good. It's very high in the West. It's like over 95% in Alberta. It's lower in Atlantic Canada. It's more in the range of 65 to 80%, depending on the eastern province. And those provinces are working on strategies to do a better job of retaining those immigrants. There is a much better in the short term, we're seeing better economic outcomes for immigrants selected through the provincial nominee program because many of them are actually selected by employers. The employer sees someone whose skills they need. They can't find those skills in the Canadian labor market. They nominate someone from abroad that they've identified or who maybe is already working in Canada on a work permit, which very frequently happens. And then that person gets permanent residency. We are finding in the short term very strong incomes amongst those provincial nominees, again, because of the prearranged employment factor for most of them. However, I add a caveat, in the longer term, the federal skilled worker point grid immigrants overtake them in terms of income. So the federal skilled workers have lower incomes in the short term, higher in the long run, because typically you're talking about the federal skilled workers are typically better educated, have what we call more flexible human capital. So they might come and work as a cab driver, like our colleague Devinder Shori did for the first 2 or 3 years, finally get their degree recognized, then they move up into a professional category. Whereas your typical provincial nominee would be a skilled tradesperson who maybe finds a very good job at $60,000, you know, as a carpenter in Manitoba, and they're doing well, but they don't have the same growth in income long term. Anyway, we see the provincial nominee program working pretty well. Some of the provinces got a bit loose on the criteria and started getting into like extended family reunification. We had a gong show in Saskatchewan where one Pakistani family had nominated 29 people under their extended family reunification program, many of whom couldn't speak any English. So we've worked with the provinces to shut down some of those abusive streams and focus much more on their economic needs.
The second question, if I might have, a very short question. Now, we have these immigrants coming to Canada and they are proficient in one of the languages. How we are making them to speak both official languages? What we can do for them to be proficient in both official languages? Because our goal here it is to have a fully bilingual country. That would be the
First of all, in the points grid for the federal skilled workers, if they have proficiency in both English and French, they get bonus points. So it gets them closer to being selected. Secondly, as I mentioned, we are offering services, including free language classes, in both official languages all across the country. And yes, in an ideal utopian world, they would all have proficiency in both English and French. But let me be honest, many immigrants are struggling to master their first Canadian official language. And I'm not going to criticize them for focusing on the local dominant language. I'm not going to criticize a Chinese immigrant in Vancouver for taking English language lessons. Chances are they might send their kids to French immersion, and maybe later in life they'll make an effort at learning French. We encourage them to do that. The services are there. But mastering one official language is the most important thing for their economic success in Canada.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Dion Labelle.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame, Messieurs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, ladies, gentlemen. I'm somewhat surprised this afternoon at the tone of the Minister's presentation. I thought that we were going to come with the summary of what was happening in the programs here federally. And I hear some very harsh words towards Quebec. Are you putting into question any of these immigration policies in Quebec? No. No, I'm not. Okay, that's clear. We want transparency, that's all. It's a very useful word, and it's used for a lot of different things. On 200,000 immigrants last year, you're quite pleased to see 1.8%, is that correct? Francophone immigration outside Quebec, yes, correct. I was looking at the reduction of that native-born population in Quebec, and it's about 2% on 200,000. That's 3,600 individuals, 2% on 200,000, it's about 3,600 people. And the loss of Francophone population has been about that since 2001. We don't know if it's 3,600 that are going into Francophone communities at all. Do you have any data on that? In 2004, for example, I have some data. 68 French-speaking immigrants settled in New Brunswick, and last year, 182 Francophone immigrants settled in New Brunswick. So that's a 300% increase since the current government has come into power. But if we match that against a real loss, the factual 3,600 over 10 years, if you brought back in 182 individuals, and we're just talking New Brunswick here, the French language minority community is still facing enormous difficulties. The targets that you're proposing, are these adequate? Are they sufficient to overcome this tendency, this downward slide, so that we can continue to maintain the same proportionality? Well, I don't have actual demographic numbers for the Francophone population in New Brunswick, but I can tell you that as Minister of Immigration, we've seen a tripling of the numbers of Francophone settlement individuals in New Brunswick. So I think it's trending in the right direction. I certainly hope it will continue to increase. That's our objective. That's our goal. As slow as it may be, things are going in the right direction. Now, in the various plans and strategies tabled in Parliament, it's not indicated, the Francophone community is not seen in any way as a priority. No, in all of our publications, in all of our information, in all of our objectives, Francophone immigration, or the intent to increase to 4.4%, is current, is present, is ever present in all of our plans and all of our strategies. Of the 10 source countries for Francophone, or rather for immigration to Canada, there's not one Francophone country. Wouldn't it be worthwhile to target Francophone countries as potential sources of immigrants, Francophone immigrants for Canada? If we were to establish Francophone immigration as a priority, wouldn't that be another way of going about it? In principle, in theory, sure, but it's not to the Canadian government to determine how many immigrants will come from which countries. We don't establish quota systems. We respond to demand. We respond to the requests for immigration, for example. And if there are more Francophone immigrants seeking immigration, we'll see an increase. The point being, Destination Canada is the only formal program sustained and supported by my ministry, my department, targeted at promoting and inviting Francophone. If you'll allow, Monsieur Dion, I'm sorry, time's up, Madame. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. O'Toole is next on my list. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Excellent remarks today. You used the word transformational. That word is tossed around a lot, but I think in the last few years, our immigration reforms truly are within that category, and your leadership on that is appreciated. Some of the statistics were quite startling to me, and I'd like to probe a little further. 3 times more to Western Canada, understandable with the economic opportunities there. 2 times more to Eastern Canada, but Ontario down by a quarter. Is it the department's sense that's almost entirely attributable to the economic malaise in Ontario?
I think that's a factor. It certainly played a role. I think it's primarily attributable to, frankly, our decision to move, to reduce the number of immigrants selected according to the federal skilled worker program and shift those positions, as it were, over to the provincial nominee programs. Basically, Mr. Chairman, the provincial nominee programs were a tiny pilot project about 8 years ago. It's only a couple of thousand people arriving in that program. It started mainly in Manitoba. But then other provinces started to see this was a very valuable tool where they could work with employers to select qualified immigrants. And so the Western and Atlantic provinces got quite excited about this. And they asked for more and more spots to be allocated for the selection of immigrants. And so and our government, we were quite happy to accommodate them, because I mentioned the positive results we've seen from that program. The Ontario government, for whatever reason, chose not to ask to participate in any meaningful way in the provincial nominee program. They basically said, we don't need this. We've relied in the past on the federal skilled worker program. And so basically the train left the station on the provincial nominee program without Ontario being on board in any serious way. And so that's really what's responsible for the shift in immigration patterns, in addition to which, frankly, economic patterns have a lot to do with this. This is not just a question of primary immigration, but also secondary. Ontario has net secondary immigration. That is to say, a lot of people who come and settle in the GTA, for example, then move out to the west, particularly to Alberta, which has very large secondary immigration. Quebec has a certain amount to Ontario, but a lot of Ontario immigrants end up moving west.
Okay, thank you. Just one moment. I have a point of order from Monsieur Godin. Monsieur Godin?
Oui, ma question était juste, est-ce que c'est relié aux langues officielles, là, les immigrants qui rentrent à Toronto?
Yes, well, my question is related to the official languages, the francophones that go into Toronto. Well, I've been giving you a lot of latitude to all members to allow the witness to answer, and I already offered you that much latitude as well. So, well, not today. I'll give you the same latitude today as everyone else. Mr. O'Toole, you have the floor.
A great deal of latitude in either asking or to our witnesses in answering questions. If the questions or answers are even tangentially related to the matter at hand, I've always allowed them. We believe in free speech and this free expression in this country. We're all adults and can handle questions and answers. So I'm going to allow Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Kennedy to continue with their line of questions.
I appreciate that, and I will remember your ruling. Thank you.
I've ruled similarly, Mr. Godin, in the past. In fact, most of the time when these issues have been raised, they've been raised by government members, and I've always ruled in favor of giving members of the opposition that latitude. So, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, so I'm going to allow Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Kennedy to continue. Mr. O'Toole, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If my friend Mr. Godin had just been a tad more patient, maybe he's following the lead of his leader. But my second question was, after laying that groundwork in Ontario, Minister, I know specifically a group involved with Maison Francophone in Toronto, and Mr. Dion Lebel touched this. There are several French African countries that have immigrants coming to Canada and targeting actually living in Toronto. And so there are primary French speakers. I'm just wondering what role your department has in supporting centers like La Maison in Toronto, which provides a range of basic health information, access to justice, that sort of thing.
So we fund about 170, we call them points of service, typically nonprofit organizations, I don't know about that particular group, but like that provide services to Francophone immigrants. And these are outside of Quebec. And I think this is a pretty clear indication of our commitment to support Francophone immigrants outside Quebec. And if I could just use that to segue back to the last question I received, why the question was, why aren't we doing more to increase Francophone immigration from Francophone countries and I pointed out that, we don't choose how many immigrants come from a particular country. It's really a demand-driven immigration system. We don't I don't sit down at the beginning of the year and say we're going to take 10,000 from India and 20,000 from France. It doesn't work like that. But the only program that we have currently that deliberately promotes Canada as a destination for immigration is Destination Canada, that is done specifically in Francophone countries, in France, Belgium, and in Tunisia, but it's also regional. And I'm pleased to announce to you, colleagues, that we are also going to be expanding a very important program we developed in 2008 or 6 called the Canadian Immigration Integration Project. This is pre-arrival orientation for selected economic immigrants, 2-day free seminar, and personalized counseling after they've been selected for immigration, but before they've arrived here, when they're wrapping up their affairs back home. This is helping them find jobs, line up jobs in Canada, find housing, apply in advance for credential recognition for the professional licenses. We now have it available to about 80% of our economic immigrants, and we are about to launch a pilot for this out of Paris to help serve our selected Francophone immigrants coming to Canada. Karine, do you want to?
Sure. Thank you. So the pilot is for this fiscal year, 2013-2014. It will be run by the Association of Canadian Community Colleges, and as Minister Kenney has said, it will be available in Paris and in Brussels for individuals wishing to come to Canada of Francophone descent and to settle in official language minority communities outside of Quebec.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now go to Madame Michaud.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank you as well for having explained that you were not trying to renegotiate the immigration agreement that was concluded between the federal government and the Quebec government, because in listening to your colleagues' comments, one could be misled into thinking so. Quebec has every right to exercise its prerogatives in terms of immigration. There was a negotiated agreement between the two levels of government, and if we were to push this even further, I think Quebecers would have much to say about how this government exercises its prerogatives and uses their taxes. So I'm very pleased that you cleared that up. I was quite concerned about that. Now, in terms of clarification, I'd like to come back to the statement of interest system, which will be implemented soon. I would like to know if the list that will be prepared, this pool of candidates that you mentioned, is this only for people who are seeking long-term immigrants, people who will become permanent residents and citizens? So this would not apply to temporary foreign workers then? No, temporary foreign workers will be able to apply to be included in the pool, but all those who are selected from that pool will be granted permanent residency. I see. So we don't expect them to leave the country after several months after having finished a work contract. No, not at all. That's wonderful. I was concerned about that, so thank you for that clarification. In the new roadmap that was presented to us, the roadmap cites concrete goals and recruiting targets amongst immigrants. Could you please send us those goals and objectives? Could you send them to the committee before the end of the parliamentary session, so between now and June 21st? Yes, thank you. In November 2010, there was a report produced that had to do with immigration. In that report, there were several major recommendations which concerned immigration, citizenship and immigration. Were any of those recommendations kept and acted upon by citizen and immigration? And if so, which ones? I do not have the exhaustive list in front of them, but I do believe that we replied with a formal response to the committee. Yes, but rather than a response to say that you were taking note of the recommendations and taking them under advisement, I'd like to know whether any of those recommendations were implemented and applied in your department. I do not have all the recommendations before me, but I believe that we said overall that we were already acting upon the recommendations. we did not see any major disconnect between the report's recommendations and actions already taken by the department. Perhaps I could complete the minister's answer, Mr. Chairman. There were recommendations, amongst others, about governance, good governance. In developing the new roadmap, we worked with many stakeholders to see if, through those recommendations, we could develop a strategy for the new roadmap, including the new roadmap, which we did develop, and we certainly took those recommendations into account in doing so. We have a new roadmap that has to do with good governance. We have placed greater emphasis on collaboration and coordination amongst the various levels of government, and we also are dealing with data collection in order to be able to truly measure the impact of this new strategy under the new roadmap. For example, there is increased emphasis on research and data collection. Those are some examples of the way that we integrated the recommendations. Thank you very much. Do I have any time left? 1 minute? Thank you. So earlier, my colleague, Mr. Dion-Labelle, was deploring the fact that amongst the country, we can see no francophones amongst the countries who have welcomed many immigrants. We could check back. I don't have the time to provide you with exact numbers right now, but if we do combine that with this fact that there already have been cutbacks of $500,000 under the current roadmap for activities such as establishment and integration of French language immigrants, how do those cutbacks and the fact that I've just mentioned to you, how does that help us reach the Francophone immigration targets in the OLMCs, or the FMCs? If you'd allow me to answer, please. There are no cutbacks. Our government has increased the federal funds available by 300% for establishment services, including the Francophone ones. So that's $200 million outside of Quebec, up to $600 million. So there are no cutbacks under this roadmap for targeted services for the FMCs, except for a few $100 million for these trips to Paris for the provinces and a few businesses.
Paris, quite frankly.
See? No. Madame Ambler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Minister Kenney, for being with us here today, as well as department officials. We appreciate your time, and I'm not a regular member of this committee, but I certainly picked an interesting day to substitute for my friend, Mr. Trottier. So I'm very, very pleased to be here. As I think you know, Minister, I'm a first-generation Canadian myself, and my parents both immigrated from Italy in the 50s. My mother in 1950 when she was 6 years old, and my father in 1956 when he was 15. After being separated from his father for 4 years, in order that they could afford to bring my father and two of his younger brothers to Canada, both of my parents, I would say, fairly easily learned English. And I would say that probably because they were young. So I'm wondering if you have any idea about the number of immigrants and age, and if that has an effect or on how quickly new immigrants learn whatever language they're immersed in.
To be honest with you, we don't have very good data on that. I mean, there's a lot of studies about which I'm not an expert on, learning languages and language proficiency, but as it relates to the free language services that we provide, this is called Language Instruction for Newcomers to Canada, LINC. It's a program that we fund out of that envelope of $600 million in settlement services. It's typically provided by nonprofit community service providing organizations. To be honest with you, because it's delivered by often small nonprofits, we don't have an awful lot of data about outcomes, and we're working on that. That's been a weakness in the system. We are developing a new framework for reporting so that we can actually track progress that we're making. We don't want to be spending tax dollars on these programs if we're not actually getting a good result from them. I would say, just a kind of supplementary comment, that typically, but not exclusively, the clients for those language classes are not the primary economic immigrants, but they're dependents or refugees. Because by definition, most of the primary economic immigrants have already demonstrated a high level of English or French language proficiency. Right. It's often their spouses and refugees who have a steeper hill to climb in terms of language proficiency.
Right. Actually, that was one of my questions about the language training. I know that we've tripled the settlement funding. And that part of that is obviously for language training, and that even though my parents and grandparents weren't considered economic immigrants, I don't know if we had that term back then. I have one grandmother who worked at a dry cleaner for 40 years, so her English it's excellent. It's excellent. She's 92 years old now, and I speak English with my 92-year-old grandmother, sadly. But no, that's right. And my other grandmother worked in the home, and so her English was never very good. So I used to speak Italian with her. But so the factors are obviously age and whether you work in an environment. So. Yeah.
We are supporting a program called HIPPY, Home Instruction for Parents of Preschool Youngsters, where we send settlement workers into homes to do visits on a weekly basis. Really? Often moms who might be stuck there, maybe living in an ethnic enclave, not having many social opportunities to speak English or French. We send workers into their homes if it's not mandatory if they want to participate. We also have online language instruction as well. Again, trying to reach those folks who might be more stuck at home.
That's excellent. Would that be minority or
both? English and French.
English and French. Wonderful. Thank you, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Monsieur Dubé.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. I have a very specific question. Or a specific issue, rather, that I'd like to ask you some questions about. And it has to do with the support network for Northern Ontario Francophones. This is a program that is coordinated by Contact Interculturel Francophone de Sudbury. And their funding was refused, their funding request was rejected by the government, and there is a great deal of concern about the lack of clarity in terms of the assessment criteria, as well as the impact. Is this a temporary situation? Will it always go through Ottawa? Knowing the economic opportunities that are available in Northern Ontario and the strong Francophone communities there, I was wondering if you could clarify the criteria as well as explain how you will ensure that there is no negative impact on Northern Ontario. Well, your questions are a bit technical in nature, so I will ask one of my officials to answer. If I've correctly understood the situation, we have 13 networks, and the one that you're speaking of in Sudbury, with a contribution agreement that it has not yet been signed. I'm not responsible for such agreements in the department, but from my colleagues, I understand that there are still a few things to clear up with the contribution agreement before they can be signed. So, if you would allow us to do so, we would be able to provide you a more in-depth explanation of the details of these contribution agreements and provide the information later on. May I please say that generally, about the assessment criteria, there is a point system which is used by the department in order to assess the historical performance as well as the quality of the proposal. being made by the organizations. These systems have to be objective and fair because we cannot subsidize everyone who asks us to. But the officials undertake an analysis using a points system and thus analyze all the applications they receive from organizations. Thank you. I'm certain that you will find the file, and I'm certain that my colleague, Mr. Gravel, will ask you about it as well. The other question I had about points of service and service offers, we can see that there are service points in the Atlantic that are closing. There is a certain centralization taking place. In other words, have you done any impact studies about the impact this will have on the OLMCs in these regions? No, we have not. I think you're talking about CIC offices, of course. We have our own cutbacks, and recently we had to make some administrative decisions. But most of those offices were very small. 1 to 3 people were working them, and they did not provide direct services. It really was an inefficient way of doing things, having all of these tiny offices scattered all over the place, offering very few services. I have just come back from Moncton, where I visited an organization called MAGMA. Moncton Greater Area Multicultural Association. And from our department, they received 4 times the funding for establishment services, including for Francophones. Their staff, their services have increased enormously. This is much more important for me than having 2 civil servants sitting in an office who do very little for clients. Thank you, Minister. But my understanding of the Official Languages Act is that you have an obligation in FMCs to offer services. What you say may be true, but are you not obligated under the law to provide those services? We did not close the offices in the FMCs, in the Francophone minority communities. This was not a decision that had to do with official languages. It was about departmental efficiencies. We kept some offices open, but it had nothing to do with language issues. So could you offer this committee a list of the centres that were closed? Centres were not closed. The certain offices were closed. Well, could you please provide the committee with that list? Certainly. The other question I have, if I have time left, is to come back to what my colleague Mr. Godin was asking you about the linguistic requirements, language requirements in the job notices for foreign temporary workers. You said that from now on it will be illegal to require languages other than the 2 official languages, but that doesn't mean that you have to have one or the other. Is that right? So if for a Francophone like Mr. Godin who wants to go work in Fort McMurray, he may not be any better qualified even if they drop English from the language requirements? Thank you, Mr. Zubi. Minister, would you like to answer? That is the employer's decision. We cannot force the private sector to choose their employees or to choose bilingual people, whether they are Francophones or Anglophones. That is the employer's decision. It's a private sector issue. It's a private sector labor issue. But as of last month, they cannot post or advertise a job notice which requires a language that is not one of our 2 official languages. Thank you. Mr. Gould. Thank you, Chair. As a Quebecer, I would like you to come back to the Canada-Quebec Immigration Agreement.
Do you think it's best to keep the status quo, or do you think that we might be able to update or modify the change for the next 5, 10, 15 years? Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. We have no intention of modifying any long-term conditions to the agreement. However, we would like to raise with the Government of Quebec certain elements, certain concerns which, as to their selection criteria, which to my mind are not quite coherent or consistent. I would perhaps ask our NDP members who have raised some concerns here as to the situation in Quebec, are they comfortable with the following? Quebec has a program for which is a Quebec immigration investors program, and they admit about 4,000 permanent residents a year through that program. Of those economic immigrants, all the data that we have, including what we get from the government of Quebec, 90% of these immigrants selected by Quebec do not go to Quebec. They do not reside in Quebec. They don't even transit through Quebec. 90% will settle outside of Quebec. So the issue I'm trying to raise here, the authority or the power to select their own immigrants through the agreement, the very point is to find immigrants to settle in Quebec, not to find immigrants by Quebec for Vancouver or Toronto. So that there seems to be some manipulation of this program, something not quite right, where Quebec is taking this money, and it's in fact the provinces of British Columbia which has to pay the costs for the social integration of those immigrants which have been selected by Quebec. My position is very clear. We have to respect 100%, unconditionally, we have to support the agreement, the Quebec-Canada Agreement on Immigration, so that Quebec can select those immigrants which will reinforce the vitality of the culture and the language in Quebec. But you don't pick Chinese migrants or immigrants to come and settle in Vancouver. So I'm going to raise a number of issues with the government of Quebec and how they manage and administer their program, because it's not only the Ontario taxpayer or the British Columbian taxpayer to assume the entire cost of these, whereas Quebec's made the initial choice. When an immigrant is authorized to enter Canada, is there any way that we can oblige the individual to stay in a province or a location? That's the challenge, of course, because with our Constitution and our Charter of Rights, we cannot oblige someone to reside in a specific province. That being said, however, Mr. Chairman, if an individual filling in the forms, investment immigrants to Quebec, indicates that their intention is to reside in Quebec, and on arrival, it's patently obvious that they had no intention whatsoever. They don't even stay over in Quebec. They go directly to Vancouver. I intend, together with our border services, security services, to launch an inquiry, to investigate, and I would consider it fraud. Because if someone indicates and signs a statement to the fact that they intend to reside in Quebec, but they don't ever have that intention, that's fraud. And we have to make it very clear to the promoters of these programs, probably in Asia or elsewhere, who are getting money. They're taking money to assist.
I'm sure the NDP would be really happy to know that this program is making millionaires out of some immigration consultants and lawyers through big, rich, upfront commissions. And by the way, most of that money is offshore, not being taxed by Canada. And we are sending a message to those guys who I think are frankly knowingly facilitating a form of immigration fraud, that the gig is up. We are going after them. We are going to take enforcement action against the promoters who are coaching people to make an application for Quebec so they can get into Canada without any intention of living in that province.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister, and Monsieur Gourde. Monsieur Godin.
Monsieur le Président, j'ai essayé de comprendre tantôt, Monsieur le Ministre.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm trying to understand. You said there were no closures of points of service. On the 4th of May, I have a local paper here from Acadia that says the Société Acadienne is preoccupied with the position that the federal government has recently indicated a significant change in the administrative structure of its CIC as to its offices. CIC offices in the Atlantic provinces of Moncton, Saint Jean, Charlottetown will be closed, and those of Saint Jean and Halifax will have substantial reductions. That the administrative region of the Atlantic will be annexed to that of Quebec, and through that, the regional offices found in Halifax will eventually end up in Montreal. Is this all hokum? Is this all false? No, it might be my understanding or misunderstanding of French, but when I responded to Mr. Dubé, I said quite clearly that yes, there has been closures of administrative CIC offices. I did say that. I said I'd give the committee a list of those. No, I was listening quite clearly. You said there were 1 to 3 individuals. No, you said there's 1 or 3 persons, and there's small offices, et cetera, et cetera. And they were doing very well their work. We contacted those offices over the years, and now we can't even talk to them anymore. Everything's being directed from Ottawa until the closures occurred. They weren't allowed to say a word. These offices were helping us significantly in our areas, even though they might be modestly staffed. Okay, I understand that, but it's not only in the Atlantic region where there has to have been some rationalization for administrative purposes. In every part of the country, there's been some streamlining. Out west, just as well. However, Mr. Chair, we are faced with a significant deficit. We have to adjust to that reality, and we have to rationalize our services. Okay, but you said there were no cuts, or the only cuts. Now, perhaps my French is no good, but you said that there was no cuts. It was the travel grants to Paris. Well, New Brunswick had an agreement 2012-13. $2 million to support Francophone immigration to New Brunswick. And the management of these funds are administered through Fredericton. The program has been renewed by Ottawa for 2013-18, but with only $4 million. So it's been $1.2 million per year reductions. That's a lot of travel to Paris. That's a very regrettable and deplorable decision. Even if the numbers are few. Now you're snapping your britches. You're telling us that you're happy that you've increased the roadmap funding, etc. I don't know all of the details of those particular grants or that particular agreement, but I'm going to ask my colleague here to answer. Well, I would request that the committee receive some of this information as well, please. You don't want an answer? Fine. Mr. Sylvester. Yes, I could, in fact, give you a bit of detail on that, and I responded with a letter to the editor after that article appeared, as you mentioned, on the reductions. It's very important to stress, first and foremost, that the program that was being administered by ACOA is going to continue for 2014 to 2018. And the grants and subventions, the supports continue. And then the torch will be passed to citizenship immigration. We are going to be spending the same amounts that were spent under the old roadmap, $4 million, on the CICs in a new roadmap. So there's literally no change to the funding of the program. With our new approach, with the new roadmap, there's going to be some net advantages for New Brunswick. All the sums which are available pan-Canadian-wide for settlement will be opened for application to them. $24.5 million, which is set aside for recruitment, Destination Canada job fairs. We're going to expand that. New Brunswick will be participating in that, so they will have advantage. And I stated this in my response in a letter to the editor, that there's not a reduction in the program compared to the old roadmap. Madam O'Neill-Gordon, the floor is yours.
Minister, for being here. It's certainly, as you probably figured out, I'm just subbing today, and I'm not a member of this committee regularly, but I'm happy to have been here the day that you were here, so I guess that's the Irish. We kind of struck luck in my being here, I guess. So I just want to thank you for being here and it being such a busy schedule. I have to just want to reiterate what you said about immigrants more and more coming to the east, and I see that regularly on the Miramichi, settling there very comfortably, I must add. And I have regular rapport with our community college and other colleges in New Brunswick, recently dealing with more and more immigrants coming in to learn and study at their schools. Regularly every year, I certainly participate in multicultural events that are going on on the Miramichi, and they become even more attended each year, I find. But you mentioned that one thing I was willing to say, the Destination Canada Job Fair, and you mentioned that this Destination Canada Job Fair has become especially more popular in the last 5 years. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on what you contribute that to.
Destination Canada?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's gotten a lot of media attention, a certain amount of buzz. In fact, we partner with a major French magazine called Le Point. C'est Le Point? L'Express? L'Express, which does a cover story every year on Canada and all the opportunities of working and living here. And we're one of the only countries that actually does these promotional activities there in France and Europe. For specifically targeted on Francophone immigrants. So it's, look, you know about the unemployment in Europe? Youth unemployment in France of well over 20%. In Southern Europe, youth unemployment in the range of 40%. So a lot of young Europeans in particular, for example, are looking for opportunities to move elsewhere. They hear about the incredibly strong economy in Canada. And they're attracted not only by the beauty of our country, but also by the economic opportunities. So I think the interest in visiting or immigrating to Canada is increasing, and that's why we get more and more attention there. It's not just, by the way, Ms. O'Neill-Gordon, through our Destination Canada projects in France, Brussels, and Tunis, but also in other areas. I was in Ireland in October, and I know your constituents of Irish descent would be interested to know, as were those of Mr. O'Toole. Got the Irish ghetto going on over here, eh? They would be interested to know that I was in Ireland with Canadian employers in October, and there were 9,000 mainly young Irish lined up at a jobs fair run largely by Canadian employers to pursue opportunities of immigrating to Canada. So, you know, I know in this place we talk a lot about our imperfections, and Lord knows we have a few. But when you get away from this country, you see how people are clamoring to get to this place, and we should all be proud of that fact.
And I want to take this opportunity now to congratulate and thank Mr. Sylvester for writing that letter and retracting it, because I did have constituents that were concerned about the first article, and so it did make a difference when they were made clear as to what really was happening. The other question I had was that the Roadmap for Canada's Official Language 2013-18 Education, Immigration, Communities has earmarked $120 million over a period of 5 years for language training for economic immigrants. And I'm just wondering how these funds will be distributed and who will be responsible for providing the language training.
Primarily, the funds are distributed on a per capita basis per province now. That didn't used to be the case. So we now we try on an annual basis to adjust the investment on settlement services by province so that it's the equivalent of about $2,900 per immigrant. And then it's actually spent by nonprofit organizations. We call them service-providing organizations with whom we have contribution agreements that are arrived at following a request for proposals process. So basically, once every 3 years, we put out this request for proposals. We say, we have this chunk of money. We'd like to receive proposals on providing language training and other services to immigrants. Nonprofits submit their applications. Our officials then score those proposals, often based on historic performance, and then they make the funding decisions. I don't interfere in that. They make the funding decisions, although I do have, of course, final sign-off, and then we monitor the performance.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam O'Neill-Gordon. Mr. Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After hearing some of the questions from my colleagues from the NDP, I'm very, very tempted to ask you about the closure of the CIC office in Charlottetown and to explain to you how devastating it has been, but I do hope that at some point I will be able to get you to listen to me on that. Today I have an obligation to carry out my marching orders issued by Mr. Dion. Minister, you don't need me to tell you that under the Official Languages Act and under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, your department has certain positive obligations with respect to official language minority communities. And now we have a roadmap which has changed its title to emphasizing linguistic duality to wording, to different wording. We know that the financial commitment under the old roadmap and the new roadmap has gone up really only because of this $120 million fund, which you admitted today is demand-based and will likely very well be used for purposes other than the promoting the languages of the minority. So I guess my question for you is, do you not see that this is not only not fulfilling the role you are statutorily obliged to fulfill, but is actually taking away from it, given the change in emphasis and the fact that the funding that's supposed to be, or the fact that the funding that is in there now, based on your frank admission, is likely to be used to teach people the language of the majority?
Okay, I think there's a misunderstanding implicit in your question, and I'm sorry if I've contributed to that. I was speaking earlier when I said that the language services are demand-driven. I meant that globally. That relates to sort of the overall framework of these things, that we try to provide services where they are requested in the official language in which they are requested. But having said that, we have dedicated the specific amount of funds in my ministry, the $30 million, to provide services in French for French-speaking immigrants. We have some very specific projects in that regard. For example, in St. Boniface, we have African Francophone refugees who we settle there. And we have a contribution agreement with a local Francophone service-providing organization to help those Francophone immigrants in French. And we do that sort of thing all across the country. So there are specific dedicated minority language services, in addition to which we write into many of our contribution agreements a requirement that they offer services in the minority language in that area. So if you are a Francophone, if you're an immigrant in Vancouver and you want to learn French, you've already got English, you want to learn French, you can go into one of the service groups that we fund and ask for services in French. So is there anything else I can add to that?
No, c'est clair.
Yeah, so we do dedicate money, but at the end of the bottom line is, if a whole bunch of people in Calgary, immigrants, suddenly decide they want to learn French rather than English, we'll give those services to them.
You candidly indicated in the first round of questions, though, that you fully expect that people who go into Calgary are going to be looking to learn English. Yep. And this $120 million is there to help them learn English.
No, the $600 million is overall there to help people learn the languages they want, find jobs and stuff like that. The $30 million there's $30 million set aside as a part of our contribution that's specifically for minority language services. Do you want to?
Also, when you started your question, Mr. Casey, you mentioned specifically the $120 million. And that is a carve-out of the broader settlement envelope that Minister Kenney has been speaking about. And under the feuille de route, it will be used to support language training for economic migrants, both English and French. So it follows what the Minister has said.
If I may also, and to build on something the Minister said earlier, Mr. Casey, there's a nuance here that I think is really important to understand, and it's something that the Minister adverted to earlier in his comments in the first round, as you mentioned, and that is that the premise that we're working on as we build momentum towards the second roadmap is one that is focused increasingly on economic immigration, as Corinne has said. Now, it is a little bit counterintuitive, but we've devised or proposed an approach that various stakeholders, including the FCFA, have approved of, which is one where you would see Francophone immigrants, that is, whose mother tongue is French or whose first official language is French, immigrate into largely Anglophone communities. Their ticket to integration, in a way, if I can use that expression, and retention is through employment. And so it's important for them to get language instruction, not necessarily always in French. Usually they're quite capable in French, but English language instruction is really important to retaining Francophone immigrants and minority Francophone communities. That's the counterintuitive part. So a large portion of that $120 million that's for language training is...
Let me put this... Sorry, I don't hope you don't think we're hogging time, but I'll go back to my Winnipeg example. You're a West African Francophone refugee. We kind of decide you're going to live in St. Boniface. That's great for the Francophone community. They've got another Francophone family that's going to contribute to the cultural life of the Francophone community. But you know what? You're not going to stay, likely, in Winnipeg if you don't speak English because you can't get a good job. So to retain that person in St. Boniface, helping them learn English only makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. And dernièrement, Monsieur Dion-Labelle.
And finally, Mr. Dion-Labelle. Minister, with all due respect, I didn't appreciate what I heard about the way you described the cutbacks, the $600,000 cutbacks to Destination Canada job fair. You made it sound like these were junkets to Paris, frivolous trips and inappropriate expenditures by senators. That was not the case. Mrs. Kenney, who came to this committee and who I respect a great deal, said this $600,000 cutback is one of the only tools, to summarize, it's to bring people who wish to recruit staff in Europe, especially in Paris. This is one of the only tools at our disposal, and now we've lost it. It's been taken away from us, whereas the government says that we have the same targets, except that now we don't have the tools to attain the targets. It's going to be very difficult for us to reach those targets now. So could you please tell us more about how you view these cutbacks, which you did seem to minimize, as if that money didn't serve any useful purpose or was used for frivolous purposes?
The word junkets, and I apologize if I'm using it in the sense that is frequently used by your party. The other day, my critic for the NDP of immigration referred to the Prime Minister's trip to the G7 summit as a junket. So if the Prime Minister going to represent Canada at an international summit is a junket, then I think that's defined as a business trip. That seems to be your definition. In any event, look, governing is about making choices. You can't balance a budget without realizing some reductions in spending. The reductions in spending that we're experiencing in Canada are a tiny fraction of what they are, by the way, in countries like France. And if we can't realize spending cuts by reducing subsidies to travel to conferences in Paris, then I don't know where we can find economies.
Mais je n'avais pas...
I deplore that cutback, but my comment actually had more to do with the style over substance. Now, with respect to the Quebec-Canada agreement on immigration, I also found that your tone was fairly paternalistic. You said two things. First of all, you said that Quebec was taking money, millions of dollars, and then they'd go off to Vancouver. They were taking money for immigrants, but then those immigrants would move to Vancouver. You're quite right. Then you changed tack a bit, and you said that some Asian groups, no, not Asian Canadians, that who are having these attracting these millionaires to Canada, and those millionaires move over to Vancouver. So Mr. Gourde talked about mobility, the mobility of the labor market, which is true, but you go after people who are doing that. Could you tell me more about what you meant? If you lie about your intention to immigrate to a certain province, but you never had any intention of doing so, that is fraud. We have to start to apply the law. I'm a bit surprised to hear a New Democrat say that we should ignore a system which allows lawyers and Canadian lawyers and consultants reap enormous profits in order to encourage people to apply for Quebec immigration without any intention of actually living in Quebec. Are you imputing criminal motives? Well, yes, it is a crime to commit fraud.
To fill out an immigration form expressing the intention of going to one place when you never had that intention, it's called misrepresentation. It's a form of fraud, and it's, of course, there are sanctions in Canadian law for that.
Donc, vous visez les fraudeurs, pas la province de Québec.
So you're going after the fraudulent people who are doing misrepresentations, not the province of Quebec. Is that what I understand? No, I'm also going to raise with Quebec our concern. I'm going to raise with the province of Quebec our concern that 90% of the participants do not end up settling down in Quebec. I am astounded that the New Democrat, that the NDP is not concerned that we've got millionaires giving consultants money in order to come to Canada through Quebec without any intention of staying there. That is quite bizarre. Thank you, Mr. Dion-Labelle. Thank you, Mr. Dion-Labelle. We are out of time.
Mr. Kenney, and
I'd like to thank the member for the last exchange. It's very helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Kenney, for your testimony. It was very helpful and detailed, and thank you to your officials as well for coming along, and to thank all members of the committee for participating in today's hearing. And without further ado, this meeting is adjourned.